Russia already has a lot of missiles. Any more are going to make it even harder for the Ukrainians. Certain North Koreans fighting in Kursk, they really struggled in terms of understanding the communication. You know, Russia already has a lot of missiles. Any more are going to make it even harder for the Ukrainians to defend themselves again. So therefore, it's useful in that respect. It's also a way for North Korea to test those missiles, which is worrying for not just South Korea, but Japan, potentially America as well. This war is a way for other countries to learn about how modern warfare is being fought, what lessons they can take from the Ukraine. Is the tank hypothetically obsolete? Is it going to be a drone saturated war in the future, or is it not? Is Ukraine a battlefield that's an outlier, as it were? So this is all a massive learning curve, not just for Western armies, but also for North Korea and for China, potentially Iran as well. And that is particularly worrying in the fact that these countries, North Korea, China, I don't necessarily know about Iran, but I'm sure they have advisors in Moscow and elsewhere on the Russian front line. They're learning a lot, and the West seems woefully unprepared, at least in my understanding from the outside. So this is worrying, even if the report isn't actually true. I'm sure the North Koreans have advisors, and they've certainly sent soldiers in the past. They sent armaments in the past as well. They've been learning since the war began. We do know, at least some hearsay, that when it came to Kursk and the certain North Koreans fighting in Kursk, they really struggled in terms of understanding the communication between Russians and North Koreans. The Russians don't speak Korean. The North Koreans, to a large extent, don't speak Russian, most likely, and therefore there was a major issue in terms of communication. Whether those soldiers are actually firing the weapons or they're simply watching the Russians fire the weapons, it's almost by the by in some respects. They're still learning and adapting to what potentially could be a future conflagration on the Korean Peninsula or in East Asia. So yeah, that alone is worrying, I would say. They're reliant on Patriot missiles to a great extent. The Ukrainians, as good as they are, and they have been brilliant in the past 4 years of this war, they haven't yet been able to develop an interceptor that is Ukrainian. So they are reliant on interceptors, not just Patriot, but others. Satrap, I think it's called in Italy. Forget me, I'm not a military expert. So yeah, I think that they are still reliant on these, and that is worrying. We're seeing that Russia is increasingly using glide bombs and has been moving those glide bombs further back from the front line so that Ukraine can't reach them. Pavlovad was hit quite brutally 3 times in, I think, 4 days recently. That's a city just east of Dnipropetrovsk. It's like Dnipro as it is now, apologies, and 80 kilometers from the front line. So it is worrying that Ukraine doesn't have an answer to the glide bombs yet. It doesn't have sufficient interceptors, at least from what Zelensky is saying, and I have no reason to doubt him. He probably knows a lot more about that than I do. So it is certainly worrying, and it's something that the West should be doing far more about, but I've said this many times before. Well, why are they targeting Kiev, or the Kiev's capital city? Again, demoralization of the public, potentially. It seems increasingly that we're seeing what was happening in the Iraq-Iran war of the 1980s, the targeting of cities, demoralization of people, similar to the idea of the British aerial bombing of Germany, and to an extent the German bombing of Britain, that if you hit the cities, you kill a lot of people, and people don't like to be killed, and that tends to upset them, and so they'll call on their politicians to end the war, and you'll have a victory. So that potentially is where they're going, and both sides are to an extent doing this, although Ukraine isn't targeting civilians anywhere near as much as Russia. But it is that's certainly, I think, why they're hitting not just Kiev but elsewhere. I've mentioned Pavlovad, but they've hit Dnipro, they've hit Sumy, they've hit Kharkiv, they've hit Odessa, they've hit Kherson, and elsewhere. There's the human safari going on in Kherson at the moment. You may have seen the video of the fruit seller trying to evade a drone. So Yeah, this is certainly problematic. It's a way to target civilians, and certainly Russia is going to hit Ukraine's power infrastructure because winter is coming in the inestimable slogan of Game of Thrones. And therefore, if they can freeze the Ukrainians, it will create even more demoralization. Potentially, that's always been the Kremlin's way. Hasn't worked yet for 4 years, but it might just finally do it this time. So what can the West do? Well, it's kind of hard. The West has put its feet head in the ground for 4 years. Yes, it's armed Ukraine to an extent, but it's only ever given it minimal weaponry. We have obviously Donald Trump in the White House, and Donald Trump's opinions change by the day, sometimes by the hour. At the moment, he seems to like Zelensky, although he hasn't actually given Zelensky anything. Um, Witkoff and Kushner haven't been to Kiev, although he said they would be going, but that may be at the end of August, or it may not be. Who knows? So there's always that problem because a lot of NATO's weaponry is American or has American parts in it, and therefore America can say, no, we're not sent, you cannot send Patriot missiles. So if hypothetically Britain, Germany, France wants to send a Patriot missile to Kiev, or a few Patriot missiles to Kiev, because one is pointless, America could just say, no, veto it. So that's always going to be problematic. And there, Trump has talked about giving Ukraine access to building Patriot missiles. You can't put a factory in Ukraine; the Russians will destroy it. So therefore, you put it in Poland. Well, that's fine, but when you need to set up the factory, that takes at least, I assume, a year, and therefore then you start the process of building Patriot missiles, which will take at least another year. So that's 2028, 2027 of the push. So what can the West do? Well, that's very difficult. The West doesn't have a lot of, outside of America, doesn't have a lot of military equipment. Ultimately, Ukraine, perhaps European powers can lean on Israel, although Israel is obviously busy fighting its own war in Gaza, and elsewhere, for better or worse. It could also potentially lean on South Korea, although South Korea is naturally quite wary of what's happening in North Korea. But North Korea is providing weapons to Russia and has been for a while, along with soldiers. So potentially that could be a way through South Korea to fight North Korea in a sort of weird proxy war, a number of thousands of miles away from the Korean Peninsula. So potentially that's the way that they will have to go. That the West will have to keep on spending money. It's bringing the war to Russia. I mean, in the same way that Ukraine has been hitting oil refineries, it's a way to highlight to Russians that this war is not going well, that it hasn't lasted 2 weeks, and that there isn't a Russian victory. And Vladimir Putin is bringing instability to Russia, something that he promised he would not do when he became president in 2000s. I mean, he said that if you give me 20 years, I will change you. I will change Russia in ways you cannot believe. And in fairness to him, he's largely been right in terms of it's been 22 years, but nevertheless. So yeah, never, that's by the by. But it's one of the things that if you attack Russia's version of Amazon, people are going to notice. I mean, in the same way that I'm sure you, and especially myself, use a lot of stuff coming from Amazon. If it doesn't work, that's quite annoying. So yes, it certainly is problematic. Now, that probably is the main reason. Cast disillusion amongst the Russian public. Hopefully they will then either vote with their feet and leave Russia, or they will do other things, and eventually the Kremlin will realize that they simply cannot go on, and a man in the Kremlin will be removed, however he will be removed. The other possibility is, and this is linked to what Dmitry Peskov said, and I would always go with whatever Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin spokesperson, says. The opposite is actually correct. That Wildberries doesn't sell any military gear. That's what Peskov said. Now, the obvious thing is that clearly Wildberries does sell military gear if Peskov has said it doesn't. So that's also quite useful because it slows down in a minuscule way the Russian army or the Russian military's ability to procure night vision goggles, body armor, these sorts of things. So that's also useful. There is also the possibility that Wildberries is heavily laden in debt with a couple of major Russian banks. Now, if Wildberries goes down, those banks go down, and therefore the entire economic situation in Russia collapses. That's I've seen that rumor. I'm not an economist, so I don't know how true that actually is, but it's certainly been a point made in the Telegram channels. So those are possibly the 3 points that I think why Ukraine is hitting Wildberries.